Howdy, my name is Kobe.
My name is Mia.
And my name is Mackenzie.
And welcome to the Couch Potato
Potato
Lab, where we bring the science to the comfort of your own homes. Today's going to be a great show. I brought in two farming experts with me today. To my left, we have the lovely.
Hi, my name is Mia. My pronouns are she, her. And a fun fact about me is that my middle name is Mackenzie.
What?
Wow.
We have a Mackenzie here.
Crazy.
Thank you, Mia. My name is Kobe. I am the host for today's show. My pronouns are he, him, and a fun fact about me is, since we're talking about middle names, I already mentioned my middle name. It was Lake, a body of water. So Kobe Lake something. Yeah. To my right, I have the lovely and amazing
Mackenzie. Hello, everyone. My pronouns are she, her. And a fun fact about myself is that my middle name is Mia.
What?
Nah, I'm just kidding. It's not Mia, it's Anne. But I thought it'd be funny. But anyways, before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that Eyes is a program, and this live stream is coming to you from Treaty 4 territory, which is home of the Nehewak, Nakaway, Nakota, Lakota, Dakota, as well as the homeland of the Métis Michif Nation. Now, we'd like to take a chance to recognize this, and we also realize that our audience is very diverse and comes from many different places. So we invite you to take a moment and recognize where you are today and where you're going to be learning with us.
Thank you, Mackenzie. I wanted to do some really cool things, but I'm getting distracted by your plate over there. Mia, looks like you got some cucumbers, some brockies, and spinach. Well, what is that?
Yeah, so I have a little salad here with all of those wonderful things on it. But mine is from a store. I didn't have time to go into my garden and make myself a salad from there, so I just went to the store and I quickly got a salad. So that's what I have today.
Ooh, store-bought salad looks very good.
Yeah.
Ooh, Mackenzie, I see you got some lettuce over there.
Yeah.
Where'd you get that from?
I got it from my garden.
Your garden.
Yeah.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it kind of looks a little different than Mia's, but it looks pretty good, I would say.
Yes, it's very, very good. I got it from my garden. I planted it, and I picked it myself, and there we go. I got a lovely, nutritious, green, leafy meal.
So that kind of concept reminds me of the farm to plate concept, where we grow our crops and all of that from our farms, and eventually it ends up at our dinner table on our plate, ready for it to be eaten. So like our potatoes, for example. And that farm to plate idea sometimes has lots of steps. But I know, Mackenzie, do you have, since you got your crops and all your produce from the garden, do you require all those steps?
Yeah, no. So we have a lovely graphic here showing all the steps. And what happened in my garden is I grew my own mini farm. So I would call my mini farm a garden. And then I did all the processing and logistics and retail. All of that is out of there. I just went right from the farm to my plate. I skipped all the other steps because I planted it and harvested and got all that myself. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes these steps are all taken. So, Mia, do you think that yours was?
Yeah, so for me, mine went through all of the steps. It started out in a farm and went through all its processing, its logistics, and then I went to a store where this salad was found, and I bought it. So I didn't get to skip all the steps. I had to go through all of the steps to get my salad.
So it doesn't, not just produce and salads and vegetables like that, but many ingredients like grains, for example, follow that farm to plate idea as well. And I see that you got some grains over there. Hey, Mackenzie?
Yeah, that's right. So I have quite a few different things over here, and one of them is grains. So here you can see that this is just regular old grain. It's not, I don't know if I would eat it just like this. It kind of seems dry and I don't know. But I eat cereal. And throughout this grain to the cereal, it took many different steps. And that is that concept of farm to plate. So this is what we would have got from the farm, those grains. So once you go through the whole process of farming, which has many different steps too, and we're going to get into that a little later, we go from these grains here to my breakfast that I had this morning, so cereal in a bowl. So that's that concept of bringing it all the way to the farm, to your plate, and learning about those different steps.
Yummy, yummy cereal. Love cereal. It's my favorite thing in the world. I eat it every morning. And Mia, I see you got some grains there too.
I I have some grains over here as well, but I don't have anything fancy like cereal, which kind of sucks. Kobe, could you help me with that?
Yes, Mia, I can help you out. So what I can do is that I am a magician at heart, and I can transform those grains into something delicious. So maybe, Mia, what do you want?
I want bread.
Bread. So I'm gonna change those grains into bread. Ready? In 3, 2, 1, bam! And wow, look at that! A slice
so
of
much.
bread.
Oh my gosh! Now I have like a full-on meal here for later.
Now,
So
Kobe,
excited.
was that just magic, or does that actually happen? Do grains turn into bread eventually?
No, I think they have to go through some like processing and all of that to eventually get from grains into the loaf of bread that you can get from the store. But I am a farming magician, so that's like an exception to all of that. So yeah, super cool. But there are different ways we plant, because I know from Saskatchewan we grow specific types of plants like wheat and barley and all that, but maybe BC on the other hand may be growing different things. And Mackenzie, do you know more about that by chance?
Yeah, of course, Kobe. So, depending on where you are and the type of farm that you have, there's many different things that we can grow. Obviously, the way that we grow a grain is very different than we were to grow this lettuce, for example. And a lot of this depends on where you live, where you, like the different weather and stuff, and it all has to do with the growing season. So in Saskatchewan, our average growing season is 117 days. And that means that during that time frame, that's when farmers and gardeners, things like that, are going to be having the most success in growing their plants. So it typically starts around May 21st, and then it goes till around September 15th. So in May, that's when they're going to plant it, and then in September, that's when they're going to harvest it. And this growing season is particular, and it kind of affects what we're going to grow. So for example, Saskatchewan is really known for growing a lot of grain crops, so things like canola or barley, and that has to do with our growing season. So those different crops grow really well within that 117 days, whereas if something took a shorter amount of time, we might not want to do that, or if it took longer, we wouldn't be able to do that. So we pick our crops not only on what we want to like harvest and stuff, but also on what we can harvest based on that growing season. So Kobe mentioned BC. So BC is known for things like cherries and peaches, things like that. And that's because their growing season is a little bit different. So their climate, their weather is a little bit different. And their climate that of an area really affects farming too. So Saskatchewan doesn't get a lot of rain, we get a little bit, so we're going to want to pick something that doesn't constantly need water, because obviously we rely on that rain to give us that water. We're going to want to look at the different nutrients that Saskatchewan soils usually have. Now, if you think even farther than BC, somewhere like California or maybe even like Florida, places like that, they're warm all year round. So their growing season is honestly up to like 365 days a year. So their growing season is all year long. They're going to be able to plant many different things. Now, I'm just thinking, I have these tomatoes here too. And the growing season here really affected this, because this tomato here is from my garden. It looks a little weird. It's a weird tomato, that's for sure.
Very green.
Very green. And this tomato, it's red. It's ready to eat. And I mean, yes, they're smaller and it's a different type of tomato, but that's because this tomato, I only planted it in May and it's not ready to harvest yet. But if I wanted a tomato right now, I might have to look to buy them somewhere else. So I got this one from a store, and this one was likely planted somewhere warmer so that it was able to grow and start earlier. So the growing season affected when we can take our produce as well.
Thank you, Mackenzie.
Yeah.
I'm gonna test you a little bit. Here's a little pop quiz.
All right.
Are tomatoes fruits or vegetables?
You know, I have to say, I am an avid Couch Potato Lab fan, and I have watched all of the episodes, so I know that tomatoes are indeed a fruit.
Nicely done. Yes, tomatoes are fruits. Love the ketchup, love the spaghetti sauce, so good. But they are fruits and not a vegetable. I know that plants they have a different time, and they sometimes grow differently, and there's different types as well. And sometimes we classify and name it when we talk about these plants. And Mia, do you know by chance what these like classifications based on time would be, or how we name those plants?
Yeah, for sure. So there are plants called annual and there are plants called perennial. So annual plants are something that it only lasts for 1 year. So you put the seeds in the ground, it grows, it blooms, it makes its own seeds, but then it dies. And so if you want that plant again, you have to go and you have to buy it again to replant it for the next year. But there's also something called perennial plants, and this one is you'll plant it once and it will come up in the spring, and then winter will come and it will go away, but then next spring it will replant itself. So it just stays in the ground and it's ready to replant. So, for example, annual plants for crops and vegetables, it would be more like wheat, corn, and peas, whereas perennial plants would be like strawberries or potatoes or peppers. But there's also sometimes they don't have to be grew every single year, but they're not able to come back every other single year. So there's something called biennials, which basically means that it only is for 2 years. So for example, carrots. Carrots will take 2 years to grow, but then after that, you'll have to plant them again.
Oh, I see. What are some examples of perennial plants again?
Oh, perennial plants? So those ones would be like strawberries and peppers and potatoes.
Ooh, the potatoes.
Just like, yeah.
Just like potato over there. Now we talked about some plants and some plants that depend on like growing seasons and all that. Let's get into more about farming and the nitty-gritty and the phases and the parts of farming and what happens during farming. And I know that the very first thing that we need to do is start to put some seeds in our soil and dirt so that plants need to grow. And Mia, so the first phase would be seeding. Do you know more about that by chance?
Yes. So we can't just put a seed in dirt and then hope it grows. There's lots of different regulations and things that can help make a plant grow better than others. So first thing is that we have to look at the depth of how far you want to put the seed into the dirt. So we have, these are seeds right here, so these are bean seeds. And then we also have this bag of carrot seeds. And so I haven't opened this carrot bag yet, but on the back it tells me that the seed depth is 6 millimeters. So that would mean that if I wanted to plant these seeds into my dirt, I would have to make sure that it's 6 millimeters into the dirt. So I'm just going to just put a bean seed in for show. So I have a pot of dirt here, and I'm just going to place my bean seed into the dirt. So that's the first step. Another step is spacing. So I'm only planting one bean seed here, so I don't really have to worry that much about spacing. But when you're planting long crops of different seeds, spacing is very important because we need to make sure that the roots that are underground are able to grow comfortably enough to not be smudged into all the other seeds. So, and also it's very important to make sure you're not doing seeds too fast or too slow, or else you might miss places and it can mess up the spacing as well. Then after that, we do something called germination. So germination is when we have our seed and it starts to sprout and becomes our plant. And the way that this can happen is with water. So we want to keep our seed nice and moist and the dirt nice and moist. And depending on the plant, you might need it in a dark place or you might need it in a sunny place. Ooh. So I'm just going to add some water. So this is me putting water in to the seed so that hopefully it will start to germinate and sprout.
Ooh, I have one thing to add. I remember when I was in high school, we did a planting experiment where we had to germinate seeds. And I have a little quick picture of what this germination is. What I had to do was I had to put a damp paper towel in a Ziploc bag and put some seeds inside that Ziploc bag as well. Closed it up and I put it in a dark room or like a dark cabinet and just waited for it to sprout or germinate, and a little seedling or plant would start to grow. And once we got that, then I was able to actually plant it in my soil so they would grow a little bit faster. So that's how germinating worked when I was in high school, and it was a great time. And yeah, so what's the next step?
Exactly. So then the last step of this seeding phase is fertilization. So fertilization we put in our plants to help them get their nutrients and to help them grow. So for example, for my 1 bean seed, I will be using fertilizer that's rich in nitrogen. But if we are using, when you're in a farm and you have like lots of big crops, the fertilization might be a little stronger and a little more chemicals in it to get rid of whatever is in that dirt. So I'm just gonna put a tiny bit of fertilization into my plant to help it grow.
Gonna get those extra nutrients. Nice.
Yeah.
All right.
And that's how the first phase happens.
Nice. So that is the first phase of farming. We gotta seed it, and the second phase is a little bit different. What happens next, Mackenzie?
All right, so last night when I was picking my lettuce, I noticed that there was a few weeds and plants in my garden that I didn't want. Now, luckily my garden, it's fairly small. So I was able to go through and pick out the weeds and plants that I didn't want growing in there to make sure that they weren't taking over my garden. Now, crops are huge. They're so much bigger than my garden. So when things start to pop up in there that I don't want, I couldn't go out there and pick all of those weeds and things out because that would take me forever. So scientists have come up with a solution for this, and that is spraying. So they spray so that we can get rid of things that we don't want. So you can see here, that is a sprayer in a field, and they're spraying chemicals onto their crop. Now, there's a couple of different types of spraying. So the first thing is herbicides. So herbicides get rid of plants that we don't want. So things like weeds and things like dandelions are common in Saskatchewan. There's chickweeds. There's many different things. And we want to get rid of these different weeds because we don't want them to overtake our crop. And we want, when we get to that harvest, we want to make sure that we're only harvesting exactly what we planted. I wouldn't want to go and cut down my lettuce and there'd be a bunch of weeds in there because then I would have to sort through all of my lettuce leaves and the weeds, and that would take a long time, especially when you have a gigantic crop. So to stop that, farmers will spray herbicides. Now there's also something called pesticides, and pesticides kill pests. So pests that would harm crops are things like bugs. So bugs, if they start eating our crops, they can eat it all up. So right there on the screen there, we have a bug that's eating a leaf, like a leaf there, and you can see that they're creating holes. So that ruins what we're trying to plant and will affect our overall harvest and our overall quality of our crops. So to stop that, farmers will spray herbicides. Now, there is a couple dangers of spraying. For one, they're chemicals, so we want to make sure that they're only getting sprayed on the actual crop. Now, these chemicals are specially made so that they're only killing the actual weed and not the real crop. So they're very, very specific chemicals that target a specific thing. So sometimes you'll have to spray for more than one thing. They might not be able to do it with just one chemical. They might need to spray it and then spray it again. But what happens when we get too much sprayer in, like if it's running off in the winter, is we get runoff. And this runoff can run into our water bodies and things like that. And it causes something called eutrophication. Now this eutrophication also happens with that fertilizer that Mia was talking about. So we put fertilizer on our crops and our plants to make them grow better. It helps them grow. Now if that fertilizer runs into a lake, it also makes the things in the lake grow better. So things like algae that we don't want in our lake will start to grow better, and it actually affects all of the fish in there. Now the same thing goes for our herbicides and pesticides. If we get all of those into a lake, those are chemicals and they affect the fish too. So you can see on the screen we have a lake that's nice and clear, and then we also have a lake on the right that's really green and has a lot of algae. And what's happening there is that algae is taking all of the oxygen in the water, and the fish need that to breathe. So they're taking all of the resources out of the water for the fish, and it causes the fish to die. And it also makes it so the lake is a lot darker, because you can see it's kind of like putting a blanket over the water, and the fish can't see. So that's not good either, because they can't hunt for their food the same way. Now it's really important in spraying that we're making sure that we have our whole entire crop sprayed. We don't want too much in one spot or too little in one spot. And this all has to do with something called dispersion. So that has to do with evenly spraying the entire area. So I have a piece of paper here, and I'm going to spray it. Now that spray, you can see if this was my crop, there's a lot right there, but there's none over here. So this wouldn't be a good spraying job because this might be too much, and that if it's too concentrated and not diluted enough, it might kill everything in that area, and that's not good either. Now, if I spray it again, oh, that made it worse. I'm changing the nozzle here. That's what I'm doing. I'm not sure which way is which. That turned it off. We're learning here. There we go. So you can see now that it evenly sprayed it. So there's no one spot that got a lot. That's from before. But now my whole entire paper is wet. And that's because it was dispersed at a wider angle.
All right, thank you, Mackenzie. So it's very, very important to make sure that it's a nice dispersal of our chemicals and make sure that it's not super, super concentrated because it could affect the crops that we want to actually grow. And pesticides are important for the bugs that are eating our crops, right? So the ones that are very, very common in Saskatchewan are like those flea beetles that we talked before. And we showed it before in another graphic where it was eating all these leaves and with the holes and stuff. So flea beetles are one. Another one would be like cutworms and like army beetles as well. So those three are the main pests in the Saskatchewan crops that we have to worry about. And we got a really interesting question over here from Eli. How old can bugs live? Ooh, good question, Eli. Thank you so much. Mia, do you know by chance what the answer is?
Yes, that is a very interesting question, Eli. But it depends on the bug. So, for example, a fly, that only lives for like about a month. But if you have a bigger bug like a cockroach, that can live up to 2 years. Which I think is kind of crazy because I feel like I see flies so much, and to think that they only live for a month is interesting.
Right. I think they reproduce so fast,
Yeah.
and it's just a whole bunch of them everywhere. Big swarms everywhere, all the time. Now we're going to get right into our activity because we talked about sprayers and the importance of it and how we need to spray herbicides and pesticides. Let's make our own sprayer today, and it's going to be really, really cool. So make sure that you download that lab manual so you can see what materials that we have. So bit.ly/CouchPotatoLab. But the materials that you will need will be 2 plastic Ziploc bags, 4 straws, a cookie pan, maybe 2 containers at different heights, so maybe one taller one shorter one. You might need some tape and some scissors and a skewer to make some holes. All right, we're going to get right into our activity. What is the first step on how to make this sprayer, Mia?
Alrighty. So our first step is we have to take 2 straws. So we're going to take 2 straws and we're going to cut them. So I cut mine pretty short because you want to make sure that they are able to fit inside the Ziploc bag. So they can't be longer than the Ziploc bag. And then one of the straws you are going to put inside of the other straw. So to get mine in, I just cut a little bit of the top straw just so that it was able to fit better inside. And then on the ends of the straws, I was able to, what is this part called?
The bendy part?
The bendy part. I stretched it out and then I bent it like that. So that's our first step.
Perfect. And I know that since we are making sprayers, we're going to be using water. So make sure that when you are making the spray or you're going to test it out, make sure it's a little bit far from your computer because we don't want to damage that computer at all. All right,
true.
Once you have that cool connection of the 2 straws and the bendy parts there, Mackenzie, what would be the next step that we would need to do?
Yeah, so that next part is you're going to want to grab your Ziploc bag. So I've completed most of this step here. So in the bottom of your Ziploc bag, you're going to want to use your toothpick or skewer or something to poke 2 holes. And we're going to poke those holes right on the seam of that bag. So just if you poke it in here and here, you want to make sure that you have enough room that you can poke your holes in. So you're going to want to kind of measure or estimate how long your straw apparatus is, the two that you connect together, and then your two holes on the bottom of your bag are going to be about that far apart. Now you want to make sure those holes are as small as you can, and that the straw just tightly fits through it, because we don't want so much water to pour out when we're using our sprayer. So to help that, I just added a little bit of tape to where I put my holes to make sure that that hole there is airtight. So when you're finished this step, it should look kind of like this. So you'll have your straw apparatus on the bottom fastened into those two holes in your bag. And then this is going to be our chemical chamber of our sprayer. So I just went ahead and labeled it so that I don't get confused which part is which.
Thank you, Mackenzie. So for the sprayer, we're going to make two chambers. One of them is the chemical one, so that's where we're going to put our food coloring in. And the next one that we're going to make is the water chamber as well. So once you have that chemical chamber finished, Mia, what would be the next step?
Yeah. So now we need to make 4 holes. So we have to get 2 more straws, and I cut my straw just a little bit, not a lot, but just so that it was a little smaller. And then you're going to take, you're going to make 2 holes on the top. So I used a little skewer, and I made a little hole here, so then I will be able to place, hopefully, place my straw in. Yeah, just like that. Okay? And then on our water Ziploc, so our next Ziploc, we need to make the holes like we did for the first part, just at the very end of our Ziploc bag, and then we're going to be able to put our straw through that hole as well.
So we're going to make 2 holes at the seam of the bottom of the water tank or the water chamber so that we can fit our 2 holes, right? So the finishing product should look somewhat like this, where you have 2 chambers. We got a chemical one at the bottom and a water one right here. And that these 2 straws right here are pretty much connecting the water chamber and the chemical chamber at the bottom. So what's happening here is that we're going to put some chemicals in the chemical chamber, and we're going to put lots of water in the water chamber so the water can go through the straws and dilute the chemical, and it allows us to use the sprayer and spray. So Mackenzie, what would be the next step? How's it going so far?
Good. So I'm just adding my last straw into my water chamber here. And like I did with the very bottom, I actually added tape to all of my straw connections with the Ziploc bag, just so I can prevent as much leaking as possible. So I have my completed little sprayer prototype here.
Ooh, love it.
Now, a part of spraying is really important is the dilution factor. And that is how much spray or chemical is going to be mixed with the water, because we want to make sure it's not too concentrated. And they do this for a couple different reasons. The first one is that we want to make sure it's not too concentrated, because that might affect the entire crop. If it's not diluted enough, if it's not concentrated enough, or sorry, if it's diluted too much, if the concentration isn't high enough, it might not kill the weeds. And farmers want to find this perfect ratio so that it kills the right amount, but also so that they aren't spending too much money or adding things to the crops that aren't necessary. So for our chemical amount, we're going to go ahead and start testing this thing out. So me and Mia are going to add about 2 drops of food coloring to our chemical chamber. So we're just going to add 2 drops. That's going to be our ratio today. And you're going to notice that this food coloring is very, very concentrated. I chose blue, but if you can tell, those drops are actually almost black because it's just so diluted, or sorry, so concentrated. So our next step then is to dilute it. And we're going to go ahead and zip this bag up so it's nice and tight. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to pour in some water. And now is a good time to pull out that cookie sheet. But did I forget a step, Mia?
Oh,
Nothing's
yes.
going to come out right now.
No. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we have holes all along the bottom of this straw, because that's where the spray is going to come out of. So what I did is I used a little toothpick, and I just made little holes all the way down. It's kind of hard to see, but they're there.
Yeah.
And then, once I put the water in, it should go all the way through, and then out of all of the little holes, it should be able to bring our chemical and water out.
And if you're not ready to start the spraying process, what you can do is that once you have those holes poked at the very, very bottom, you can put some tape over top of it to make sure that it's not spraying any water, or if you're not ready at all. But once you are ready, you can put those chemicals in your chemical bag, poke your holes like what Mackenzie's doing right there. You can open up the tape so the sprayer is ready to go. And Mia, what would be the last step to make sure that this sprayer is spraying?
Yeah, so now we are going to add in the water and see what happens.
All right.
And I know we're supposed to make this at an angle sometimes if it doesn't help. If you have like maybe two people, you can make it at an angle, or you can use two different heights of containers. For if you look at what Mackenzie's doing right now, she has a bucket that's really, really, really tall, so that can have her water chamber can rest on that, and then the chemical chamber will be at the bottom where the cookie pan is, so that we're not spilling everywhere.
All right,
Mackenzie.
You ready to dump it?
Yeah.
All right. Oh goodness. Oh no, my sprayer, it broke. Okay, well it still came out. It still sprayed a little. It's still coming out there.
Ooh, Mia, you got it. Nice. So you can see that the water is going through the water chamber into the chemical chamber. It diluted those chemicals, and you can see it through that food coloring, and it's spraying across. So at the very, very bottom, you can see that it's spraying the red chemical all over the cookie sheet.
Yeah. I just had a little bit of a leak. I didn't close this plastic bag as tightly as I should have. But otherwise, yeah. So it was water up here. It went into only the two little food coloring and was able to turn red. And so now our chemical is spraying out.
Nice.
So I think if I were to do mine again, I think that maybe I would fasten my straws a little bit better with some better tape. And then I think I would also make sure that I was holding it from the chemical chamber as well as the water chamber, not just the water chamber, so that I was holding the weight, because I think as soon as the water got into the chemical chamber, it got too heavy and just fell off. So make sure you're holding it, both of those chambers. The one thing I do want to notice here is that my water here that would have hit my crop, it's very diluted now. So we went from a very, very dark blue to kind of a lighter baby blue, and that has to do with adding that water to making sure it's at that perfect concentration.
Because we want to spread that diluted chemical around our crops as much as we can, so that we can destroy those weeds that we do not want in our crops. And if you maybe don't have a sprayer or you don't have a hose, you know how to make one, and all you need is some straws and a Ziploc bag. You can make your own sprayer, and it's going to be a great time to water your plants. Or maybe you got some herbicides and pesticides that you can use and spray on your garden. All right, we talked about the two phases with seeding, right, fertilizer, germination, all that. After that, it comes with the spraying phase, so to get rid of the weeds and bugs and all of that. Next step is probably the last step. And what would that be, Mia?
Yeah. So our last step, phase 3, is harvesting. So if you had a little garden, you would probably harvest a little differently than if you had a big farm with lots of crops. So the way I'm going to explain is with a big farm and lots of crops, and that has 2 steps. So the first step is swathing. So what happens is a big equipment truck comes through the crops and is able to slice them, or take all of them down and make piles of all of our crops. And then when this is happening, it is being able to have all the seeds ready, again, for the next set of crops that will be made. Then after we have all of our swaths together, we do something called combining. So then this is when we take all of our crops together and we combine them, and we are able to take them to a store, or if someone is going to buy them straight from there, sell them to them. Or if you're going to eat it right then and there, then you can also just do that.
Awesome. All right, so the last step was harvesting, and a really important player of the harvesting phase would be combines. And combines, I think, are really, really cool. They are gigantic, and farmers really rely on the combines to help with the harvesting process. So let's take a look at this diagram and go through how the combine works. So at the very, very bottom, we have the feeder and the cutter bar. So what happens is we're taking in the crop. So the cutter bar is pretty much cutting the stems at the base of the stems so that the entire crop can go into the feeder. And after the feeder, pretty much the feeder is the main point of the combine that actually first interacts with those crops. And we're pretty much, there's a conveyor belt after the feeder, as you can see, that the crops go through, and it goes into the next phase, which is the threshing part of that. And in the diagram, you can see at the very, very top, threshing. So what happens here is pretty much we're kind of getting rid of those, we're knocking the kernels from the cobs, the beans from the pods, and seeds from the seed heads, so we have that actual seed that we can use from later on. Once we got that, it's all stored in the grain tank, and after that is the last phase, which is separation. And the sieves at the very, very bottom, so the bottom right, that is the main part of the separation portion. So this part is a combination of the cleaning fan, the upper sieve, and the lower sieve. And the goal here is to float the mat of the grain and the residue across the sieves on a cushion of air so that the shaking motion of the sieves allows the grain to fall down through the residue. And at the end, it comes off of that chopper and spreader to spread all your seeds back into the plot of your farm again. So that is how the combines work, and how the harvesting process works as well. And I know that there are different types of crops, but we scientists, many biologists, have the ability to actually modify those the genes of the plant so that we can get a desired product that we want. And Mackenzie, you know a little bit more about these genetically modified crops and plants, okay?
That's right, Colby. So what you're talking about is something called a GMO, and that is a genetically modified organism. So those are living organisms whose genetic material has been artificially manipulated. And what that means is that scientists have went through and sequenced the DNA, so what makes that particular living thing, and the specific way it looks and acts and things like that. And they've changed it just a little bit to get exactly what we want. Now, there's a few misconceptions with GMOs. Some people think that they're not healthy to eat. And most of the time, GMOs are actually okay. In fact, these apples, they look similar, but they're different. They're different types of apples. And sometimes genetic modification happens naturally, and sometimes scientists do it to get a desired product or end result. So these apples have been modified. So maybe years and years ago, there was only one apple. But now when you go to a grocery store, there's tons of different kinds of apples, and that is all because of genetic modification. Now, when we genetically modify it in a lab with genetic engineering, we're getting combinations that we normally wouldn't, or we get them faster than we would in nature through evolution and natural selection. So we're getting exactly what we want right away. So even something like these tomatoes, the plant and seed was likely genetically modified, so we could get a tiny little cherry tomato here rather than the big traditional tomatoes. You'll also notice that this one, it looks kind of unique, we'll say. It doesn't look very round, but you don't often see this in a grocery store, and that is obviously because grocery stores are very careful when they pick which ones they buy, but that's also because they have genetically modified them to make sure that they're all very nice, plump, juicy tomatoes, so you don't end up with the crazy looking ones like this one here. Now, a lot of times these genetically modified foods are very important, and we actually want them because they help us. in other countries, they've had some problems with vitamin A deficiencies. Now, vitamin A helps humans fight different diseases and infections. So when you're low in vitamin A, it's not very good for us because when you get sick, you have a less chance of recovering from that sickness. So what scientists genetically modified was rice, and they came up with something called golden rice. And this golden rice is really, really high in vitamin A. So you can see that picture on the right there is the golden rice, and that left picture is just our traditional rice. And that right picture, if you ate a little bit of that golden rice, it has so much vitamin A that it allows you to get what you need, and it helps humans boost their immunity and their immune responses. So some things that we genetically modify are very helpful to humans and help us solve different problems in our world.
All right, thank you, Mackenzie. I think GMOs are very, very important, and another process that scientists have used is natural selection. So, for example, did you know that Brussels sprouts and broccolis came actually from the same plant? And what happened over the years is that farmers selected specific traits of that plant so it can grow into like a broccoli, or in specific traits for the Brussels sprouts to become whatever it is, right? So for example, for broccolis, we got that really nice bushy top area and then the bottom stem. So pretty much what happened was that plant that they had long ago, they selected for that bushy part more, and they kind of breeded those bushy other offsprings together so that we can get the broccoli we have today. And I know for many GMOs and like all the natural selection stuff, that we got different apples. And I know that, for example, those are two apples that Mackenzie had, but they are very different. So one of them is a jazz apple, which I love personally because it's nice and crunchy, and it's a little bit sweet, but it's also sour as well. And I kind of like that crunch and that sourness of an apple. But the other one that we have is the Royal Gala one. And honestly, I'm not a big fan of Royal Gala. It's like, it's okay, but I think the crunch factor is not there all the time. So that's why I'm very picky with my apples and all that. Now it is the time for a cool segment where we have two of our scientists go head to head against each other. It is time for our science showdown. Alright, so for today's Science Showdown, we're going to have a spray off and see who is the better sprayer. So what's going to happen is that both our scientists, Mia and Mackenzie, will have their own sprayer, and they're going to spray as much as possible into a beaker with a time limit, so maybe about a minute. They're going to spray as fast as they can. They can choose whatever nozzle they want because they can change the setting of it and produce as much liquid into that beaker. So for example, Mackenzie has a little beaker right over there, that goal, and we're going to compare who can spray the most. We're going to measure the volume from that and take out your sprayers, my scientists.
I picked the one I used before for my demo because I know that it is very good, and I'm going to pick the straight nozzle, the one that just sprays in a single line, and see how that does.
Like a jet?
Like a jet,
Like
a jet stream.
All right, what's your tactic to win, Mia?
All right, so I have decided that I'm going to try the more mist sprayer and see what happens there.
All right.
I'm excited.
Make sure your beaker is a little bit in the, a little bit more forward. All right, are we ready, scientists?
I am.
Be careful with the laptops. All right, you have maybe a minute.
Okay.
On Kobe time. Get ready. Get set. Go!
Oh, it's filling up so fast. My
Ooh,
finger's getting tired, though.
Maybe you're going to fill up the entire beaker then. All right, I'm going to say 10 more seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2,
I can't go
1,
any faster.
and done. Hands up. Hands in the air. Ooh. All right. Now, let's take a look at your beakers. Mackenzie, how much water did you get out of that bottle?
All right, I'm going to look here. It looks like I got just under 60 milliliters.
Wow.
Yeah, milliliters there.
Dang.
Just under 60.
Wow, farmer would be proud. Maybe instead of using that giant sprayer, instead they can use you. You can spray all their
Maybe.
crops. All right, Mia, how about you? How much water did you get
I
out?
only got about 40 milliliters, but I was having such a hard time, like, pushing this down.
Yeah.
Ugh.
I don't know.
Alright,
I
nice.
chose my weapon pretty good here.
Nicely done, nicely done. All right, so that means our winner with almost 60 milliliters of water goes to Mackenzie. Nicely done. All right, because you won, you get to dare either Mia or me a funny dare. It's up to you.
What? Kobe,
Oh, not me.
I dare you to let me spray you. I'll use the mist function, of course.
Okay, sounds
Okay,
good.
I'm going to make sure I got it on the right mist
Yeah,
function.
that jet would hurt.
Oh, it's still on jet.
Oh, thank God you checked.
Still on jet. Where was that mist? Oh, goodness.
I guess I'm gonna
I
get
found
sprayed
it.
by a jet. You found it?
All right, are you ready?
I am ready.
Watch your computer, Kobe.
Oh,
Oh,
a nice breeze. Oh, feels good. You know, we talked about farming, and it seems like it's an easy thing to do. Hey, there's no troubles whatsoever, but
Ooh, Kobe.
right?
I think you're mistaken.
I know.
So, unfortunately, there are a few things that can go wrong in farming. And unfortunately, some of them are out of our control. And one of the main things there is weather. Now, weather plays a huge role in the success of farming, especially here in Saskatchewan. So, when you have a gigantic crop, I know for me, I just walk outside, turn my hose on, I water my few flowers, I'm good to go. But when you have a crop that's acres and acres big, so big that you can't even see the other side of it, you can't go out there with a hose. That would literally take forever. So they rely on rain and rainfall to water your crops to make sure they're getting enough water to grow big and tall and strong so we can get the biggest yield possible. So yield is how much you get off of your crop. Now, when things don't go well, with the weather, it really affects our crop. So even things like the wind can really affect the success of our crop. If it's really windy when we're spraying, I might spray the seeds around and bring them to different places so they're not at the right spacing, the right depth. Or if it's really windy, we won't be able to spray. And if it also changes the conditions of our crop. So if our crop is too wet, we can't bring the tractor in there. It'll get stuck. And many things like that. So there we have it. If you go in there, when your crop is too wet, it's not going to be a funny sight.
Nope.
And then that other tractor is going to get stuck too, and it is going to be a big old mess. That is for sure. Now, this different weather can really change the timeline of our farming because farmers are very, very good schedulers. They know exactly when they want to plant. They know exactly when they want to fertilize. They know exactly when they want to spray and harvest. Now, when weather comes along, it messes it up. And there's many different consequences of this. If we spray too late, for example, bad things can happen because that spraying can take over, the weed that we're trying to spray for can take over the entire crop. For example, I have a little demonstration here for us. So let's say that our Smarties are our real crop, so the one that we're trying to grow. So we have our Smarties in here. It looks like it's growing well, but then along comes a weed. And we put it in, and there's a few M&Ms in there. Now, let's say it's really, really rainy. It constantly is raining, and we can't get in there to spray. These weeds are going to keep on growing, and then maybe another rainstorm comes, or it's too windy to spray. So these are going to keep on growing. And now you can see there is a lot of M&Ms in here, and they're all mixed in with our Smarties, and it's really hard to separate them. So if you sprayed, the spraying isn't going to kill all of those weeds, so it's not going to take out all of those M&Ms, and it's going to be really hard to separate our crop in the long run. So it can overtake our crop and really affect the success of our harvest.
All right, thank you. I really want those weeds and plants now. Those are delicious, weeds and plants.
They are.
Sweet treat, hey?
Oh, yes.
Maybe I'll eat them afterwards. All right, thank you, Mackenzie, for making me realize that farming is not an easy thing at all, and farmers have to put on different scientist hats. Like, they have to be biologists and understand their crops, the growing season, and all that. They have to be chemists to make sure that they have the right chemicals, the right dilution, and the dilution factor to make sure that they are not killing their plants but just killing their weeds. And they also have to be engineers as well. Hey, they have to operate their combines and grain carts and all that. And some farmers may even design those grain carts and combines too, which is really interesting as well. All right, it is now time for our favorite segment. Ask Our Scientists, where Mia and Mackenzie are going to answer your questions that you have sent to us. So the very first question that we got was, can we grow crops in the winter? Mia, do you know the answer by chance?
Well, yes, we can grow some crops in the winter. For example, kale or maybe potatoes. Those can be grown in cold weather. But the problem that it comes to with growing them in cold weather is when it frosts. So as long as you can put a blanket or something over top of your crops so that there doesn't get frost on them, then they are able to grow in colder weather.
Awesome. Thank you, Mia. All right, our next question is, what happens when you put too many seeds in one area? So I know that Mia was talking about spacing and the importance of it. Mackenzie, do you know by chance why it's important to space again?
Yeah, of course. So it's not only important to space so that we can make sure that there is enough room for those roots, like Mia was saying before, but it's also really important because if we put too many seeds in one area, what happens is those seeds and those roots in that plant start competing for resources. So rather than working together and growing to make a huge crop, they start competing with each other. So it's kind of like your teammates fighting rather than your teammates working to beat the other team. So we want to make sure that we're going to make sure that our seeds can all work together and get the right amount of resources so they're not competing with each other.
I know competition is one of the hardest things in nature because, like, plants compete with one another, animals compete with one another, our scientists compete with one another, so it's a big thing. The next question that we have is, when harvesting, can you swath and combine at the same time? Mia, do you know the answer by chance?
Yes. So, like I talked earlier, there are 2 steps to harvesting. There is swathing and combining, but there's a word called straight cutting, and this allows us to swath and combine at the same time, which makes the process go much faster. It just uses a little bit more equipment, but it is possible to do.
Awesome. Thank you, Mia. All right, and the very last question that we have comes from the Hayes brothers. So thank you, Hayes brothers, for sending us your question. How do GMOs, so genetically modified organisms, affect the human body after eating? And Mackenzie, you talked about GMOs before. Do you have the answer to this question by chance?
Yes, I do. So genetically modified organisms are becoming more and more popular. And as I was saying before, many of these genetically modified foods are safe to eat, but they are relatively new. So scientists are working very hard and they're constantly researching because they're so new. We don't necessarily know the long-term effects, so we have to make sure that they're safe. And of course, before a food product gets released to a grocery store, places like that, they do go through like a screening process to make sure they're safe for humans to eat. So they are safe for us to eat, but we don't necessarily know the long-term effects. So we're constantly researching as these new genetically modified organisms come up and as they're created.
All right, thank you, Mackenzie. All right, that is the end of our Ask Your Science segment, so thank you so much for sending in your questions. All right, that is the end of our very fun farming episode. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.